Hello everyone and welcome to the second part of my Oberheim OB-X series. Today we'll be focusing on the keybed. But before we start, here's a question for you. What do screwdrivers, hair combs and flying bombs have in common? They were all made by an American company in Connecticut whose specialty was carving pieces of dead elephants. That's right, Pratt Read. I find the history of this company absolutely fascinating. So if you don't mind, I'd like to share it with you just briefly before we start on the keybed service itself. So if you want to skip ahead, I'll put a link in the description down below. But if you have the time, please stick around and listen to the history of this company. I find it absolutely amazing. When researching Pratt Read, I started off by thinking, isn't it funny that a screwdriver company made a synthesizer keyboard? I mean, how does that happen? Like, which came first, the screwdriver or the piano key? And then I found out that they made a flying bomb. I mean, seriously, you have to pause for a moment and think, why would the US Navy award a glide bomb contract to a company that primarily makes piano keys? So just think about that for a second. Like, wouldn't you award it to a company with aviation or military experience? Like, you know, someone that's made a bomb before? If you don't believe me, go look up the Pratt Read LBE-1. Yeah. Anyway, so let's get started about some history. So, in the 1800s, Pratt Read were one of the two biggest manufacturers of ivory key tops in America, the other company being Comstock Cheney. Both companies were built on the back of the ivory trade. So essentially, Pratt Read were ivory cutters for at least the first 150 years, probably more like 175-ish. They made all kinds of stuff from ivory, like ornaments like baubles and recreational things like billiard balls, just heaps of stuff. It all started around 1798, where Phineas, can someone help me pronounce his first name? Phineas Pratt invented a machine that could cut hair combs much faster than someone could carve them by hand. So this guy was an engineer. He developed a cutting machine. It was a bit like a power saw that ran off either water or a windmill, so some mechanical drive. Around the same time, in the early 1800s, two men named Williams and Reed started a company selling combs that were probably made by one of Pratt's machines. At that time, the combs became a lot cheaper because of this new mechanism. And so lots of people sprung up selling them, of course. So eventually both companies became leading manufacturers of ivory combs. Now, about 30 years later, ivory cutters started shifting a lot of their production over from combs and ornaments to piano keys in particular, because in the mid-1800s, the demand for pianos increased rapidly. So this is where it starts to become a bit more relevant to us. So in fact, in America, the tipping point was probably around 1851, when an American-made piano won top prize at the Great Exhibition in London. So to put this in context, this was the first ever World Industry Fair, and it was spearheaded by Queen Victoria's husband, Prince Albert. So go look up the Great Exhibition in London. It's an amazing event. It was quite political in a way, because it was like Britain trying to prove that they were still superior in a lot of ways. And so it was kind of done in spite of all the American manufacturing. And to have that piano, an American-made piano win, was quite like a big event. And the event itself was actually really massive. It was said to have been visited by a third of the population of Great Britain, so about 6 million people. So this was massive. The piano that won was made by Chickering, and later on Pratt Read were a major supplier to Chickering. Now some online sources quote that this first Chickering piano had a Pratt Read keyboard, but it's far more likely that it had a Pratt or a Read keyboard because the two companies hadn't merged yet. I think the merger happened about a decade later. But what matters is the award put American-made pianos on the map, and demand for American pianos went ballistic. So this is really the point where the demand for piano keys, the piano key tops went ballistic too. So ivory trade in particular, the demand went up, like it just skyrocketed. And this new demand caused massive changes in the industry and led to a lot of mergers and acquisitions as ivory cutters scaled up to meet the demand in the 1850s. And it was in that next decade that the merger between the Pratt Brothers Company and the George Read Company took place, probably around 1862. I've seen quite a few different dates from that, anywhere between 1861 and a few years afterwards. Now, to give you an idea of scale, this is really cool. By the 1870s, it was estimated that there were about 900 metric tons, about 900,000 kilograms. So what's that? 2 million pounds of ivory a year turned into piano keys. This increased dramatically toward the end of the century, where there were well in excess of 300,000 pianos a year being sold in America alone. And in fact, peak piano sales didn't actually occur until about 1910. I read that somewhere and I've gone back to find that article and I can't find it. It was estimated about 75% of the ivory exported from Zanzibar, which is a semi-autonomous region of Tanzania, was shipped to the US alone. That's a shitload of piano keys. I honestly had no idea the scale. It's just amazing. In fact, ivory continued to be used in piano keys until the 1970s. I remember this when I was growing up. I remember there being a lot of talk about ivory. It was a really big thing, even well into the 80s. What's interesting is that at the same time ivory was banned in piano keys, Japan overtook the US to be the biggest manufacturer of pianos in the world. That didn't have a lot to do with ivory, obviously, but it was another sign that the tide was turning against the traditional manufacturers. Of course, now we talk about China in the same way, but China is currently the largest manufacturer of pianos in the world. And ironically, it was still legal to trade ivory in China until this year, 2018. The ban only came into force on the 1st of January this year. Isn't that amazing? So as a final note, Pratt Read ceased manufacturing keyboards, keybeds in the 1980s, and I haven't been able to find an exact date, but there you go. That's the history of the company Pratt Read, where this keybed came from. I find it absolutely freaking amazing. I'm so interested in that kind of stuff, and I hope you enjoyed that. So let's get started into the technical part, which I hope you will enjoy. Okay, so before I start pulling it apart, let's do a quick overview. This is a keyboard from a polysynth, so it uses a keyboard matrix to decide which keys are being pressed. Now, a keyboard matrix is a little different to how the monosynth keyboards are designed. Most Pratt Reads that you will see will be in monosynths. So this one is a little different. The monosynths have a single bus bar for the gate and another bus bar for the CV, which will be like across a resistor ladder. And as the key presses down, there'll be two J wires. One will touch the gate bar and the other one will touch the CV. Now, the output will be 2. signals, one for gate, one for CV. This one has actually an 8x8 matrix output. So there'll be 8 bus bars and there'll be 8 sets of wires that touch those bus bars. And a little bit of logic will go on to decide the keys that are being pressed, and that'll be sent to a processor which will then allocate voices. Now, if we actually have a look at that in this keyboard, this design is somewhat of an old design even for its time. This synth came out in 1979. In fact, you can see the date stamp on this Keybed has 79, so the 25th of the 7th, 1979, this was made. Now, polysynths had been around since the mid-1970s. Probably the 2-voice and the 4-voice have been credited of being the earliest modern versions of a polysynth. But the first synth that was designed fully from the ground up as a polysynth was the CS50. So that CS series, they had thought about the design stage very early on, and the keyboard in that synth is just magical. It is the best keyboard still to this day that I enjoy playing on. And the technology in that keyboard is just amazing. In fact, still wonderful. It's still really wonderful. And by comparison, this Pratt Read looks far inferior, not even in the same ballpark. It just came from a time that was a little earlier, that's all. And in some ways, a lot of people would consider it better because it plays quite well. The keys spring back quite hard. They've got a lot of metal in them, so they have a lot of weight to them, so it feels good, like it's good quality keyboard. But so did those CS series keyboards. So 4 years before this one, there were some wonderful keyboards being produced. And in fact, the 70s were a really great time for keyboards. It wasn't until we got in the 80s where we started to get some real crap. But yeah, I like them all. All 70s keyboards I really like. And this one's no exception. So if we have a look, the keyboard matrix, what is it? Well, it's like basically an 8x8 grid where when you touch 2 wires together, you can do some logic to sort out which key is being pressed. And you can press multiple keys at a time and still tell them apart. And you can't do that on monosynths, because in monosynths, this, we'll say this is the gate bar. There'll be 2 bus bars in a monosynth, one for gate and one for CV. So let's assume this is the gate bar in a monosynth. When a key comes down and presses it, we get a connection with the gate bar and whatever key it was. Now, if we press 2 keys at the same time, they both hit the same bar. And we can't tell the difference between them. So that's why you get high note priority or low note priority in a mono. So you'll just make a decision in the way it's designed of which one to take as a priority over the other. But a polysynth, you can press 2 keys at exactly the same time, and this one will be able to tell the difference between them. And the reason is that the bus bar isn't one continuous bar. It's snapped into 8 pieces. So if you have a look at this section here, see where these black rubber things are? This is actually a cut in the bus bar. So wherever we see one of them, it's a new bus bar. So we can count them. 1, there's another one between these 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So this is an 8x8 keyboard matrix. Now the last 3 positions aren't used because 8x8 is 64 and this is a 61 key keyboard, so the last will have 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 wires hit the last bus bar. So you can see there's 2 connections here. One is from the bus bar itself, and the other one is for the 8 wires. Now each of these 8 will be on a separate bus. So the wire number 1 will be on the same bus as the next wire number 1, the next wire number 1, etc, etc. So you can see when the key comes down, you get that, what we call J wire. We call that a J wire hitting the bus bar. Now the reason why it's called a J wire is because the end apparently looks a little bit like a J, but really it's exactly like a W, so I don't know why it's a bit of, I don't know, tech slang. Now, these rubber parts that hold the J-wire, there's a couple of different versions of these. You can get one that's like a grid with 9 holes in it, where you can position where the wire goes. But these ones are just the silicon ones, and they just pull, oh, they're not silicon, they're just a clear rubber, and they pull off just with your hands like that. So before you remove a key, you'll have to pull off that rubber thing off the shaft that comes through from the other side. So, quick tips on what you should do for the basic problems you'll find in a Pratt Read. So normally, what you would see is in here, there's a key stop. So when we press the key down, the key hits the top of this rubber thing in here, and when the key goes up, it rests against the bottom. Now, they're called bushings, and these ones in here look grey, but the ones you get as replacements, they're black. Now, you'll see a lot of videos on YouTube where people go into here and they get a screwdriver or whatever, and they try and dig it out, leaving the key on. And in fact, the instructions that I got for the key bushings that I bought, they tell me to not take the keys off. But honestly, I can't figure out why anyone would want to do this with the keys on, because it's so much easier when the keys are off, and getting the keys off isn't that difficult. And that's a great segue for me to start pulling it apart. So, first thing we need to do is just remove all of these holders for the J wires. What you want to do is just turn them around so that they face the opposite direction. And you'll need to do that with every single one, or else the keys will damage the J wires if you try and pull them from the other side. And next to the springs, which are pretty much the same as every other keyboard, there will be different spring strengths for the black and the white keys. The only keyboards that didn't seem to have that were the really, really cheap ones. So anything semi-decent, you'll need to sort the springs out. So in this case, they are red and black. The red springs are for the black keys. The black springs are for the white keys. So we need to remove the white keys first, because they are preventing the black keys from coming out. So in this case, we take out all the black springs, separate them, we'll remove the white keys, and then we'll go back and remove the red springs and the black keys. So start doing that now. Black springs. Good idea to put them in the container, because it's very easy to lose parts like this. Now, once the springs are out, the white keys will start coming out. There's this little hole that goes over this black tab. Some of them get stuck on the tab, so I just use pliers to lift the keys off. Once that tab part is off, you'll need to then lift the key up so that this will, the part that pushes the J wire down can come out of its hole, and then you push the key forward to get the bushing out. So it isn't that difficult. It depends on the key. Some of them are tighter than others. Oh, that one was easy. Oh, that one was really easy. And now for the black keys. So first are the springs, and then it's just the same as the white keys. They're quite loose actually. Have to be careful I don't pull it up too fast, because they're actually not held on very tightly, these ones. Yeah, I could pull these off with my hand. And we're done. So all the keys are off, and we've got a blank keybed, and we've got very good access to our key bushings now. But there's one thing I'd like to do first, and that's have a look at the J wires and the circuit board underneath. So if I just flip this over, and now we can see the bottom where the J wires are inserted into, but they're actually soldered on the other side. So to remove any of these, we would need to take this circuit board off. We will do that because I'll have a look at each of the J wires and maybe clean them a bit. And also a couple of wires from this ribbon cable have fallen off. So we'll need to solder them back on. But before we get the circuit board out, we need to get the bus bar out. And the only way to do that is from this side. So the circuit board you can do from either side, it doesn't really matter. But the bus bars can only be done from this side. So if we just poke these standoffs through, we should be able to remove the bus bar, or at least move it a little bit. The wires will still be, for each octave, the wires will still be connected to that circuit board. But this will allow us to take the circuit board off. Right, so let's see what kind of disaster we just made. The bus bar will be detached now. Hopefully we don't lose anything. Good. We have the ability to move the bus bar, which is good. And the reason why we need to do that is because these wires here that connect each octave will still be connected to the circuit board, so we can't just take the circuit board off. The bar needs to come with it. And we're off. And we'll just look at the circuit board. Right, so the first thing I'm going to check is those two wires that fell off. They came off the end connector and these two pins. If I follow those tracks, I get one to here and one to here. Now on the other side of the board there's just two jumpers. So the wire jumps across to here, then it goes to a diode which jumps it across to the J wire. So these two wires that fell off, they're just two J wires, and I think they're 7 and 8. Now if I get those the wrong way around, just 7th and 8th keys will be playing in the reverse order, and that's pretty easy to spot, so I'm not going to worry too much about that. I'm going to put them back to where I think they should be, and if the keyboard all plays in the right order, I'll leave them, and if it doesn't, then I'll just swap them around. So that's an easy fix. Next is the condition of the J wires, which look okay, and the bus bar. So I may pull them apart a bit more. Firstly, I'd like to show you though the separation of this bus bar. So if you pull one end a little bit from the other, sort of need two hands to do this, but you can see how it separates. Now this is just a shrink tube that connects them, so don't lose it. What I'll do now is just check the condition. Maybe wipe the wires a little bit, have a bit of a closer look. If they look okay, I'll leave them. If not, I might replace them or clean them. So you can just get a rubber. So I just put like a metal piece underneath and then a rubber on top, an eraser, and then just give it a bit of a clean. I've just got my splicing block here, which is what I use for cutting tape for my reel-to-reel machines. It just just provides a surface for the J wires to contact with as I'm rubbing them with the eraser. Now have a look at how much difference it makes. Now remember, you only have to do the very end where it touches the bus bar. Now I don't know whether you can see that or not, but that wire become a whole lot more shiny. See how that one looks shiny now? I think I've gotten the right angle for the camera. That looks completely different to the other ones. So it's fairly simple. It doesn't take very long, and the result is really, really good. Okay, so I found two J wires that I want to replace, so let's do that. You can see this is the new one, and it's shaped a bit like a W. Now we have to put it in from the underside of the board and then solder it in. Okay, so I've put the J-wire in through the other side, and I will just put a little bit of solder on, and I'll try and move it around a little bit. Try and make sure that it's in as far as it can go. Right, so that one's done. It's a little bit bent, but we can straighten that. And don't forget to check your solder joints afterwards, because I've just noticed that this diode here is no longer connected, so I'm just going back and fixing that up. It's really important to visually check everything that you've done. So just to show you the difference between the original J-wire and the aftermarket J-wire. So this is the, where am I? Yeah. This is the original. You can see it's W shape. And this one is the aftermarket one, which is like a coil. The original, I don't know, I guess they're a little bit easier to fit in. The coil ones you can compress with pliers and then fit in. But I still prefer the originals, and I've still got a few left, so that's what I'm using. Okay, so the circuit board is back in the frame. You can see the standoffs are back in. I just have to clean some of the dust off. There's no food or drink or beers being spilt in this one, so it's just a bit of dust. And finally we're up to the keyboard bushings, and look how easy it is now. Ta-da! So you don't need a YouTube video to show you that. So that's really easy. So just go ahead and pull them all off. And then we'll replace them with these. These are my pre-lubed keyboard bushings that I got from Arc Sound. He was a really nice guy. So I'm going to give him a plug. I'm going to start sharing all the places that I get parts from, or at least the ones that I trust anyway. I've just got a circle of friends mostly, and it's just the odd place that I find, and every now and then I come across somewhere that's really good. And I'm not one of those channels that sells parts. I hate that bullshit. Buy! And if you're the 1 millionth subscriber, you get this free set of steak knives. Did I give them away in a previous video? Right, so enough of the shenanigans. This is where I got mine from, Archive Sound. But don't search for this. Don't search for Archive Sound, whatever you do, because you'll end up with a completely different website called Archive Sound. The link is an odd one. I'll put it in the description. But his prices were pretty good, actually. They were a lot cheaper than a lot of the other places you can see here. Oberheim OB-X, OBXA up. So $54. And he was lovely. And they came really quick. So there you go. That's where I get mine from. Okay, so before I put the new key bushings on, I thought I'd just show you the alignment of the key stops. So if you find any that are really far out, like this one, you can see one there is a lot lower than the others. Yeah, it's a bit far out. So you can align the bad ones now. It is probably a little bit easier to do them with the keys off, although you'll never get it exactly perfect until you put the keys on. So I wouldn't worry about it too much, but you just use flat nose pliers and you can grab it by the bottom. And that's the same way you would do it when the key is on, but you get them most of the way there now. Some of them a little bit too high as well. So I just give it a quick fix and then do the rest later on. Ew, they are so slippery, which is the way I like it. Much prefer them with the grease on, even though it's a bit yucky. Because if you apply it later on, you get it everywhere, and it's much worse. So, anyway. And finally, I'm up to the part that I've wanted to show you for ages, which is polishing keys. It makes so much difference to a synth to see a mirror finish on the keys. It really does make them look special. And this is something that I wanted to do for a long time, and I found it a little bit difficult to get started. So I thought I might show you how to do that. So this will be sort of like a beginner's guide to polishing keys. So I'll show you how to source the parts, what to choose, and then how to do it. First things first, the motor. You need to choose a motorized device that doesn't run too fast. Now ideally a hand drill is perfect because they don't run very fast. The problem is that you need to mount it somehow to the bench, because when you've got a key and you've got your polishing wheel on the end, when you put pressure on it, this drill's going to move all over the place. And a lot of the drill mounts that I priced that attached to tables were very expensive. In fact, they were more expensive than the drills themselves. So even if you've got a drill just lying around, you'll find that the attachment is a barrier to entry, because you will need to spend money, and sometimes quite a lot of money, on just getting an attachment for the drill. Now, you can make your own, and that's what most people do, but I've decided not to use the drill. So the one that I've decided to use is a small motorized polishing device, which looks similar to a grinder, but it doesn't have as strong a motor and it doesn't run as fast. So it's important to get one of these with a variable speed, and I'll be using this on absolute lowest speed that it can go. Now this one can go between 800 and 10,000 RPM, so I'll be using it on 800. The second part to that is that the attachment that you put on here, the larger they are, the faster, well, it's not spinning any faster, but the speed of the outer rim is faster because that circumference is bigger. So if you had a look at two together, if you spun these at the same rotational speed, the outer speed is actually faster on the larger one. So you want to get the smallest polishing wheel that you can. You also want it relatively thick too. You don't want a cutting wheel that's thin, because the key will slip off. So when you're trying to polish on a small wheel with a small key, it can slip off a lot, and you can damage the key by hitting the side of the polisher. Oh, this is funny. Have a look at this. Made for USA. See, I can't use that because I'm in Australia, and this is made for the USA. So obviously it rotates in a different direction or something. So, man, that nearly sucked me in. I nearly thought it said made in USA, but no, made for USA. No. Right. So I'll show you the website where I got this stuff from. That was just eBay. These were from an Australian website, but it'll give you an example of what to look for. Okay, so firstly, on eBay, I've just searched for polishing tool motor. Depending on the search term you use, you get a whole lot of different results here. Even just polishing tool just brings up a complete mess. Most of these are directed at people that are doing jewellery or car work, so you've got to be careful. Make sure you get the slow ones. So this is sort of like the one that I bought, about 60 bucks Australian. I think I got mine for about 40, so this seems a bit expensive. But there's some that are just a rip-off. If you have a look, where are we? It's the same one again, nearly 100 bucks, 118, 300 bucks. Look at that. It's the same kit. Far out. Yeah, so just be careful. Cheap, slow ones are what you want. And as far as the tools go, let's have a look. You want to stay away from the large, thin ones, because the key slips off that edge, and also the larger they are, the faster the outer surface is running. Don't get the hard ones. That one says made in USA. Okay, and these are like the attachments here that you get for the drills. So you can see it's got like a little metal attachment on the end. Let's see if we can find some more. Yeah, so like this with the little thing. So they're for the hand drills. They're quite good. The ones that I got were from polishup.com.au. You'll just go to, probably you'll find a similar place in your country, maybe for a car polishing website. So this one's mostly car polishing website. And I've gone and got the Swans Down finishing wheels As you can see here, swans down, finishing wheels. And I'm using the double width ones. So you can see there's a single width one here, and there's two of them together to give you a bit more space. And lastly, you need the polishing compound. Now you can find plastic polishing compounds, they're quite common. I've just got a generic one, but I think the Novus number 1, which is a plastic clean and shine, that will do as well. Basically you just want the least abrasive polishing compound that you can find. So they're also called finishing compounds. Okay, so before I start, I usually put some finishing compound on the polishing wheel, but this is the only time I will do that. After that point, I will just put the finishing compound on the key itself. Just keep refreshing it on the key. Now, before you start the wheel, you've just put a wet substance on a fast spinny thing, and so what's going to happen is it's going to spray everywhere as soon as you turn it on. So I've got some cardboard here protecting the wall. I've got my synthesizers all covered with their dust covers on and towels on top of that, and I'm also going to use some glasses so that I don't get it in the eye. And it's not a bad idea to have a towel on your lap too, because or else you'll get it all over your jeans or shoes or whatever. So with all that said, let's start. Okay, so tips for polishing. First things first, keep moving. Don't stay in the one spot, or you could actually overheat a patch of the key. And secondly, keep checking how you're going, because surprisingly you may finish quite quickly. You only need about a minute per key if the surface is already quite flat. So as long as you're not trying to get out any scratches, this process shouldn't take too long. So you can already see that's really shiny, and I've only been polishing that key for as long as the camera has been filming. So that's one take, and that already looks pretty special. So it doesn't take too long to do the keyboard. You probably about an hour, hour and a half, and you should be about done. And we're done. So you can see the difference that it made. I mean, I can see my reflection in it now. So it was a lot of effort, but wow, the result was fantastic. So the last couple of things we've got to do left are just to double check the height of the keys, which most of them should be pretty straight now. And also to set the tension, which you can do by increasing the pressure or decreasing the pressure on the bushing, and you do that by just putting a screwdriver in the clamp and rotating it a little bit to either separate the clamp, or if you need to increase the tension you can use some pliers and just close the clamp a little bit, and that will make sure that the key doesn't wobble but also doesn't grip on the bushing. And lastly, it's just the position of the key relative to other keys. Some keys there might be a large gap between them, and on the other side they might be touching, and I hate that. So if you just grab the bushing post or the key stop, and then you just move it a little bit, you can change the position of the key relative to the keys next to it, and that will align them much better than what they were before. So that's it for the teardown. Now let's put it back in the OB-X and see how it looks. Finally I'm done. Wow, look at those keys. Shiny keys. Yeah, so that's just about as good as I can get it now. Yeah, it's vastly different to what it was before. Awesome. But we all know it's what's inside that counts, and at the moment there's nothing inside this OB-X, so it doesn't count for much. So next is the electronics. Finally, the easy bit. Finally. Alright then, I hope you enjoyed this. It took a very long time to make. And I will see you in the next video, where we start with the power supply and work our way through the rest of the circuitry of this wonderful synthesizer. Alright, that's it for me this time. See you in the next video.